let's get started. We have our presentation about restorative practices in schools, counseling, and leadership. And we're excited to be here. And I'm here with Tanya. We're at our school, so hopefully nobody interrupts. You might hear the bell a couple times. And we will get started. So thank you for participating. So go ahead, Tanya, a little about yourself. If you just want to share a couple items, and then we'll get started from there.
Perfect. So I am a school counselor and assistant principal at a charter school in Layton, Utah. I currently also work on a crisis response team with a consortium of different charter schools. And I love helping students just work around their obstacles, whatever those obstacles may be, whether it's academic or social, emotional, whatever, to just whatever barriers that are coming their way. And I have been at this charter school for 6 years.
Yeah, and so myself and Tanya have worked together the last about 5-6 years. And I was teaching here, and then we both became administrators. And together we've been working to transition our school from being very traditional, where it is a zero tolerance, to we employ love and logic. And we use the practices that we're going to share with you today about restorative practices with our students. And hopefully I can share some examples of perspective as an administrator that I've had both positive and sometimes it doesn't go as well as planned. But we've also used it with our faculty and staff. And so hopefully today the takeaway is a little bit about what we've done and how it can help you. So if you want to talk at this slide just a little bit.
So the outcomes, what we want to kind of go over is how you can, I'm not sure what the familiarity is with restorative practices. It's pretty popular. But basically, we're going to talk about the benefits that we have seen firsthand using restorative practices in a school counseling program, and this applies across the board to school leadership. We see it at all levels, the benefits there. We're also going to ask that you kind of consider ways that you can incorporate this practice in your own school and take something. And then hopefully this presentation will give you some ideas that you can start getting the ideas flowing on what you can do to actively plan to start using this.
Thanks. I just want to add, it takes some time. It's not a one and done type program like any program that's going to be effective at a school. And it can be challenging because one of the big pieces is changing the behaviors of adults in order to influence the students to create an environment where both adults and children feel respected, heard, and that's really the practice is giving each party the opportunity to communicate. So it's something that takes some time, and there certainly is a learning curve. But we hope that sharing what we've done and taking fielding questions at the end will help both. So we have a video, and so let me just switch over to that, and then I'll share the video with you folks. This work, application. I think we're okay.
His cup was full before he to school, and then he showed up late, looking like a fool. He had drool on his chin for waking up late, and an aching in his belly because he barely ever ate. The clothes he wore were straight off the floor. There was an odor pretty hard to ignore before he goes to class.
Just switch to application share mode. Sorry about. Now,
Yes.
Okay.
Class, he got a show ID, but he lost it. $5 penalty. He just wants to sit down and take a deep breath. Forget about his dad locked up for meth. But his homework, once again, he forgot. And the teacher gotta put him right on the spot. Like, where's it at? Why is it late? How come you can never keep nothing straight? He don't want to debate, but he gets defensive. Says a couple things you could call offensive. But just like that, kicked out of class. And that's one more class he might never pass. Told him to come back when he's ready to learn. But what's he gonna learn if he doesn't return? Learning by himself is much less demanding. No failure and no reprimanding. It also engrades his understanding. Built in his life will just keep on stranding him on his own. Keep leaving him alone. If he wanted neglect, he could have just stayed home. But he came to school. He wants to grow. He's been through things no one should have to know. Now I'm not saying his behavior should be tolerated, but a little compassion is appreciated. Teaching is hard and we get frustrated. So much harder when we're separated. One smile, one minute, and let him know you're there and that he's not alone in it. He looks tough, but he's not. This statue will might be all that he's got in his home. He wants you If a kid told you that 2 + 2 was like 25, what would you do? Probably teach, reteach, and then teach again. But if a kid talks back, then the lesson ends. We send him home, 3-day suspension. Call it discipline, but it lacks dimension. Completely ineffective in the way of prevention. Provides no process for ascension. Dissension, reinforced daily basis. Detention, administered, stuck in stasis. Think of weak ministered, true solution. What would that do to our evolution? Restorative practice, revolution. Healing what hurts, purifying pollution. Some like to say that the system's broken. That doesn't really help with no suggestions spoken. There's people working hard from the inside out that the media never says much about. They report the mess and never the success because people doing well doesn't so much press. They stress the kid that got incarcerated, but not the at-risk that graduated. They never show his mom's face so elated because the news is negatively saturated. So teachers try to stay positive, learn to let it go and then to forgive. There's quite a few kids that count on you, and there's so many sides to the job you do. You're an innovator, a co-creator, a mentor and a collaborator. Your classroom's a magical incubator, giving nourishment and there's nothing greater. One smile, one minute, and let him know you're there and that he's not alone in it. He looks tough, but he's not. This statue might be all that he's got in his home. He wants some John Steinbeck once said that I have come to believe that a great teacher is a great artist, and that there are as few as there are any other great artists. Teaching might even be the greatest of the arts, since the medium is the human mind and spirit. What kind of artist do you want to be?
All right, so we're coming back from a video, and hopefully just following that video is always so inspirational, and it relates to a lot of the students that we work with and kind of gives us an insight of what we see on the outside is not what's going on the inside, and that we should take a minute, as articulated in that little video, to understand and give them a moment to share their perspective. So as we started to think about sharing our why and why this practice is so helpful in education, but also personally what we hope to accomplish. Tanya's going to give a school counselor perspective. Hers is really personal, and mine as an administrator is also personal. I remember a young man when I was teaching our career technology education, and the challenges that he was facing, and really taking the time and implementing this model one-on-one. So we're going to talk about ways to do it in group, but it can also be done one-on-one. And one of the challenges or hardest parts is how to do it in the moment with a class present. And one of the ways is developing that relationship ahead of time. And that's why it takes time. It doesn't work to just suddenly say, I'm going to talk with you, we're going to spend time. But it's built day in and day out by being there, being present, saying hi to the students, asking them about their day, taking a few minutes before class starts and just asking maybe a random question. What are they doing, for the holiday? What do they think of the political climate? And being prepared for all kinds of answers. But by doing that, what we're doing is we're setting the foundation for a relationship, because the premise and the importance of this process being restorative is restoring the relationship. Or it's really what the restore is restoring the relationship, restoring that balance, because the last thing what we are trying to do is have a power struggle. And too often, power struggles are what happens, and then there's secondary and third order effects that are negative, and then we're led to that response where fine, you're suspended. So that's one personal experience that I had, and as an administrator, we're excited to continue to process that, bring our new teachers in, use it in our professional development with our current teachers. And my why, I'll give some time to Tanya to share what her why and how she has used it.
Thank you. So my why, as a school counselor, I found that I needed not to just feel like I was making a difference with my students, but I wanted to be able to do so in a manner that was efficient and impactful for the amount of work and time allotted. As counselors, school leaders, there's clearly not enough time in the day to meet all the needs of our students. School counselors, when I first started incorporating restorative practices, my caseload was 1 to 400 students, one counselor for 400 students. As you can imagine, that's a lot. That's a tall order. The American School Counseling Association recommends that the ratio be 1 to 250. And in my state, in Utah, the average caseload is 1 to 350. So 1 to 400 is not unusual. But having that compared with the increased mental health needs of our students and the lack of basic social skills just is a big drain for one person to try to meet the needs of their students. So this is what called me to restorative practices, because it is something that you can do quickly and efficiently once that relationship foundation is made. Another benefit is teaching students and adults, for that matter, because this is very effective for teachers and all levels of staff, to learn some basic social skills. Some people maybe have never learned them, and certainly children are learning as they go, and not all the learning they're doing socially is obviously helpful. So in this restorative manner, we're able to address that level for our students. And then also dealing with escalated behaviors, using restorative practices and that mindset helps us not get bogged down in managing the behavior, and we're able to see the student for what they're needing and what they're able to do.
Okay. But on this next slide, we have a matrix that just kind of shows where sometimes we are too permissive and allow behaviors that we wouldn't really want in our class, but we don't know how to handle them. And so the student continues to behave that way, and we're frustrated, and then it comes to a break point. And then we also have on the other spectrum, too punitive, where there isn't the ability for the student to express themselves or to adapt to the different class. So we are a K through 9 junior high. And so in our junior high, of course, the students are older and they have to switch classes, and they have to adapt to the different personalities of the different teachers. But if a teacher is too punitive or too quick, they really don't have that opportunity. So when you look over on the slide border there, One of them is academic counseling can be used, but using peer mediation to help that also, to allow for what is appropriate and what is not in the classroom as far as behavior and also discipline and rules. And so one technique to use that leads and sets the foundation for this is having a discussion just at the beginning of the school year. What is appropriate behaviors, and what does each student want, and what does the teacher want to get out of the class? And I know that seems almost so remedial that we forget, or maybe we do it in our disclosures, but the reality is if the students have a buy-in into what they feel that's appropriate, for instance, helping guide them. I remember when I was teaching, one of the rules that they wanted was gum. And I know that I wanted them to listen. And so really when we discussed what we wanted, I was able to give in on the gum because we had to have some rules related to that. But it felt like that made the students feel like they had achieved something where they were more willing to work with me and saying, well, I need this. We both agreed that one person should talk, that everyone should respect each other's comments. We should respect each other's space. And really what was interesting is later in the year as it went, all I had to do was go, hey, remember we agreed to this? And that was a form of setting conditions, because when that rule or that respect was broken, then we could go to a peer mediation and say, hey, do you recall? And then a lot of times their peers help them come back to what was a standard, or we could do it in a different setting. For instance, the next class period. And that's what I meant. It's hard when the situation is at the moment, but oftentimes our emotions are elevated. And so as the adult teaching and modeling for the youth, one of the important things is to pick the appropriate time. And we're going to talk about that and then how that affects behavior. And so Tanya's going to talk a little bit about how she's used that in counseling and how it's helped with our behaviors.
Yeah, and when we do this presentation or training with staff members, one of the things we talk about is this social discipline window. It's not about being in the right box. It's more about having the right combination. So as an administrator, if you're an administrator, a lot of times we're quick, we're the last resort, so to speak. And so sometimes administrators might fall too far into the punitive, the two box. And in the school counseling world, a lot of times school counselors might be known for following in the 4 box, being a little too permissive, and just trying to give everything for a student. So it's really about finding the right combination for the situation. So when we, like I said, if this was an in-person training, I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios. So if we were together, I would have squares in the room, and everybody would get up and go to the correct box. But just let's take this little mental trip here. I just want you to think about, if this was your situation, think about which box you fall into. So you have a middle school student who's continually trying to avoid and trying to skip. They do not want to go to math class. You need to work with that student. Which box would you fall into? Okay, now the next one is you have 2 high school girls that get into a fight because they have the same prom dress. Which box would we fall into? Personally, on that one, it's probably, I actually would probably be in the not box myself, because I don't want to deal with that sort of drama. But that's where my mind would go to. And then here's another one. You have an inflexible teacher having a personality conflict with a student, and parents are asking for a change of teachers. And so that is kind of another one, as of where do we, and so in all of those situations, how do we get out of our 2 not or 4 box and move together with those parties involved into that with box? And so that's kind of the crux of this social discipline window and the way of thinking. And it's a win-win for everybody when we can move towards that with box. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we'll go to and there's some different practices. We just talked about scenarios. And do you want to lead out on this one?
Sure. So Restorative practices in school. So school policies vary, and more, I think it's well known that zero tolerance discipline policies are just not always, they're not effective. We all know that. And sometimes yet we still find ourselves using them. And the bottom line is they do not solve the underlying problem. And so what can we do? How can we use restorative practices in school to help get to those underlying issues, because they just keep coming up. So school counselors typically are not involved in the discipline phase of working with students. However, you can use your counseling team to be essential change agents in helping students get through that process of whatever they have done. In using restorative practices, the issue isn't about the rules that are broken necessarily. It's more about having people understand what was the harm that was actually done. And one of the key things is you'll see effective questions. We don't talk about the why when we're using those things. That comes later. There's some key questions that we ask. And for our team, we have little cards that we can hand out. Our recess duties have them that have these questions, such as what happened? What were you thinking at the time? A lot of times they are not thinking. And we're fine with students saying I wasn't thinking. We want them to acknowledge that. What have you thought about since, if this is something that's happened? And what do you think you need to do to make things right? So those questions are non-blaming. They're not loaded, like, why did you do that? Like that sort of thing. It's not about myself. It's really, the focus is on that person. And they're just used to promote introspection and to get the student or the person, because these questions work wonderfully with teachers as well, just to start thinking about their own role in whatever has happened. So, and then many of you are probably all familiar with circles, staff circles, harm circles, social circles, morning meeting circles. And why do we use circles? Well, the circle provides an opportunity for everyone to belong and to contribute. And one of the cool things I just like to share, in my experience when using circles, everyone contributes whether they talk or they don't talk. We typically use a talking piece and pass it around. And even the students who don't want to contribute nobody's ever forced to participate. And that could be students or teachers. The act of passing the talking piece and saying pass is still participating in the circles and contributing. So that's that. And then the bottom talking piece on research bears out. The problem with the research, it's a relatively new practice, and there is such a wide scope of how restorative practices is being implemented that there just needs to be more research on the outcomes. But every school that's using them, if people use them well, it bears out that people like it and they feel more connected to each other, which is ultimately what we want for our students, to feel connected to the school and the staff and those teachers that are there to help them.
So really quick, I wanted to share on the first two bullets. You mentioned restoring the harm. There's always two parties when we're looking at this, and this is where that person that may be the cause, the student or the teacher or the adult parent, gets the opportunity to recognize what their actions did. And so here's an example. I'll share one in a moment, but here's just kind of an example. The other party could even be the school. So when I defaced the building, what was the harm done and who was the harm? Well, we have what our school are the Lions, and so we have roar, and the harm is done to that respect, and they want to be part of that community. And so that's a discussion point. That always is important to recognize that they have a part in that, but there's also a reason. And as Tonya said, sometimes they don't have a reason, but by giving them the opportunity to reflect, they start to realize what was going on. And where this becomes beneficial is they're then able to monitor themselves in future instances that start to happen in the similar scenario. Because ultimately we're changing and modeling behavior, and then they're becoming their own. Instead of us policing their behavior, they police their own behavior. On affective questions, one of the skills that we have to develop as the adult and as the modeling mentor, I would say, is we have to be able to do some emotional intelligence and see what's going on. So here's a perfect example. I'll share one as I was a new vice principal where I was down in the elementary. I get the call that one of the first grade classrooms is being cleared out because one of the students is throwing tables over, and they did the protocol. So I urgently go down there. I come to the door, and I'm briefed really quick by the teacher. She's very upset. All the students are upset. I tell them, why don't you go outside for extra recess if that's possible to clear the room. And as I step into the room, I mean, it almost breaks my heart. I see a little 6-year-old sitting on the floor behind a couple thrown desks, just kind of done, emotionally done. And what I think saved the day is we've been practicing this in group, but the application of being able to read, what does that little person need and what's going on? I don't know, but I could read that it wasn't good. So what I did is I came and I sat down next to them, first getting on their level, and just kind of started out, just like what Tanya is saying, is, hey, what's going on? How are you feeling? And what was interesting is a power struggle had occurred between the teacher and the student, in which the teacher wanted him to sit 2 chairs over, and I don't know the reason why, but in discussing with him, he had a problem with that student before where they would punch and they would poke each other. And so in his mind, he felt like he was being put into a corner of either I'm going to get in trouble with my friend, they were kind of like frenemies, or I can protect myself from getting hit from this kid, and the teacher just doesn't understand, to which resulted in a secondary behavior, which was throwing the table. Now, the primary behavior with the teacher was just a little defiant, a little obstinate. That was a perfect opportunity for de-escalation from the teacher. You have to pick what we're going to focus on. Once it broke, then the restorative practice is, how do we get back to that? Because the other children needed to study, that student wanted to study, but they just resulted in a behavior that they really weren't in the mind to, this will cause that. But they knew once it was over that they were in trouble because I came. I never come to the classroom or get called on the intercom unless it's going to be at. And this child had several incidences. So once we've got those feelings done, and I can see the affect, I can also say, well, what can we do about it? And put it back, empower the student. So this 6-year-old, even before I could finish my sentence of, well, what can we do to help the teacher and your friends, and you wanted to do this, and let me help you with math. I guess that was the lesson at the time. And before I even finished, he was starting to put the tables back. Now, some of them were too heavy, so we put them back together, but that was a key point where he did the restoration of fixing the classroom, rearranging, putting those chairs. And there was a little bit of pushback, but I just stood my ground and said, we need those students, and I explained to him, and he didn't, he kind of pushed back because that was his mode. He would push back. But once he saw I was willing to work with him, once he understood the other students were waiting, once he understood that there was lunch after this class, which is one of his favorite times, he was able to move from the moment to the next moment. And he even forgot about that. And sometimes it takes a partner or a separate person, because we're in the moment and we're emotionally charged, to come in and help with those restorative practices. Maybe we're not set, but as we practice, we can do better at realizing we're going the wrong way, and then establish that rapport. And I think if that teacher had been practicing a little bit better, perhaps they could have got the rest of the class set up, come back and said, what is the problem? Why don't you want to, how can I help you? And maybe found out what his concern was before the explosion. And I know that takes a little more time, but think about the time lost over a class in a class period versus the time lost or perceived loss in helping the one and maybe coming back to that lesson in a little bit. So it does take practice, but that was an example that I had in the moment how we apply it. Did you have something you want to share?
I just wanted to add to that. If you think back to that square of the social discipline window, that's actually a perfect example how someone is in the two category with this has to be done in this way, and sort of like insisting that. So just imagine a box and they're just stuck there, whether that's student or teacher, and they're stuck there. And as Dr. Campbell was saying, when he was able to go in there and work with the student, which also involved working with the teacher as well, but then how they were able to move to that with box, working together. So the student was able to work with Dr. Campbell to put the room back together. Eventually, and the teacher was able to also work with him in order to express her frustration and concerns and that sort of thing on what she could do to better help the student, because she did care about the student. And getting stuck in those little boxes that we often sometimes find ourselves isn't helpful when we're trying to work with others, whether that's students or staff. So I think that's a super good example of how we can get in those boxes. So thanks for sharing that example.
Yeah. In fact, our next slide is because it's called circles, and so we're going to share that piece.
So this is again on the video of the music video and this one. They're 4-minute videos. I get that's a little long on a media presentation. However, they're quite impactful. I just want to set this one up. This video is a program that has been implemented. It's Mesquite Independent School District, and they are using restorative practices. And it's all student perspectives on how using the circle format, this discussion has helped their students. So it's a great example of the benefits.
Okay, so bear with me as I transition to the video so we can share. All right.
And just remember to show truth and speak with your heart, guys. Our first circle, there was a lot of guidance. Our class didn't know each other as well. Third or fourth circle, everyone began to really share their experience, talk about things they usually wouldn't talk about.
Helping others and taking care of people that you don't see every day that don't look like you.
Schools are normally separated by the jocks and the nerds and stuff. And when you come to circle, all of that kind of goes out the window.
Being together as a class, not really a class. I look more at them as a family.
You begin to feel like family.
One big family.
Family life. First things first, I just want to thank y'all for actually coming out here and wanting to do the circle with me today.
Growing up, trying to figure out what we really want to do in life, that's the type of stress school puts on us.
A lot of the times, words of students are a little hushed down by louder voices, i.e. like teachers or just staff members in general.
Sharing my personal experience with them just brings me closer with them. And that's what I love about Circle.
And just hearing her say that she's not happy with herself just hurts me, because
You see there's not students getting to know each other as well as they probably should.
But when they give us a chance to voice our opinions, our struggles, our fears, and everything that we kind of hold in, it's amazing.
I was really upset because everything's going on in my life and no one was there to talk to me. I want to get out of all the sad phases of my life.
I'm not the only one going through something. Everyone else is. It's not the same thing. It could be different.
Everybody has different problems, different things going on in their life, whether that's mom or dad, or if that's having a house to live in or losing a family member. Everybody has those things.
Not only that you are such a smart young man, but you're a leader, and I thank you for that.
We share the same things, and I never would have thought we would share those same experiences.
Being able to come together and realizing that everybody's dealing with that at once, it's pretty shocking.
Keeping everything inside, to me, it doesn't help you, it doesn't make you feel better, it just makes you feel worse. So I feel like coming to Circle, being able to share everything that's on my mind, I get advice from each and every one of the students and the teachers, and it makes me feel more better.
It's made me a stronger person, really, because if I kept all those feelings in, I felt like there's no way to get it out. And speaking to other students that share the same things as me, it's made me a stronger person.
And I really look up to her, and I don't know what I'd do without her.
When someone says something to purposely make me mad, I used to just lash out and say bad things to them and do all that stuff. Now I'm just like, okay, maybe, they're probably feeling a certain way. Let me see what's going on. Let me see how they're feeling. And I actually talk to them and see what's on their mind.
I'm more nicer to people. I never really thought everyone was going through things. I honestly and truly, I used to be a mean person, and I hate that so much. And, just Circle has made me think about things, like what other people are going through. And I feel like everybody's going through something, and that's why they act the way they do.
You always told me to keep my head up no matter what. And I just thank you for that. It really means a lot. This changed me a lot because, I'm a happy person, but like going through senior year has been a lot of stress and stuff like that. I'm just like, but with the Circle, I can just like express myself and like let everybody know how I'm feeling about now or going into graduation. So it's really helped me a lot.
I love Circle. I love that Mr. Overton brought me into this. I love it.
Coming to Circle makes me happy.
When you say you want more people to build a relationship with each other and you want your school to be safe and for people to feel really connected, when you come to Circle, you really learn about people's struggles and the things that other kids are going through, and that helps them connect through their situations, and that's what creates and makes a better school. So that's why you need to be doing Circle.
When we do circles or that were portrayed in that circle is what's interesting is the vulnerability in our positions, but also the unification. If you look at that, one of the things that happens is we don't have us in front of us blocking what we're doing and how we're doing. Is this where we were at? I'm trying to do things at a time. So change that over, and then I'm going to share my application. There we go. Still learning technology. Welcome to 2020. So, as I was saying, the circle, when you sit next to your peer, you can feel and you saw a lot of hugging, you can feel their support, but also when you don't have something to hide behind, people are a little bit more real. In the video, you may have noticed that there was an individual that was outside of the circle, sitting there. I believe that's a student. That's one of the key factors is having a comfort zone where people are comfortable to be who they are. Circles can be used to restore after problems, but even more importantly, as in this example, it was just an opportunity to get to know each other. And what happened was each of the individuals started to modify their behavior because they recognized that they could share and they had impact and that they were recognized as an individual in a collective. And during this time where we're separated because of COVID, because of distancing, it can be absolutely more challenging, but setting up groups, maybe they're not in a circle, but doing the Zoom and having it set aside in your school with a specific purpose and sharing and bringing in small groups to share how they're doing could be very powerful, especially during this time. You heard that young man talk about the stresses that he felt that he had just as a senior, and that was just in a normal year. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Tanya, regarding circles in this video.
So we've kind of been talking about restorative circles where we're restoring something, but they're also really powerful to build something. And so building a community using this platform, which could just be your classroom community, is a really powerful mode, a building block, essential as a leader. But as I've been thinking, like during COVID times, it's so interesting to see a video like this where everybody's so close together and they're touching and they're hugging each other. And so I've been thinking about how can we incorporate this same essential practice in these COVID times. And one of the challenges is building that connection. I think we're all facing a greater obstacle, and how do we keep our students connected? Our students are on a hybrid schedule, so they only come to school 2 days 1 week and 3 the alternating weeks. And one of our focuses right now is building connections with them, this community, on their virtual day, so we don't lose them, so to speak. And so as I've been trying to figure out how can I do a circle virtually, one of the things I've been practicing with is using, I think everybody's familiar with using Zoom as a platform, using the clapping or celebration emojis as the talking piece, so that kind of goes around. That way rather than calling on someone on a Zoom window, they select it and then they're able to, that's the talking piece. So there's some other messaging platforms or video conferencing platforms where if someone does a filter, then that would be the talking piece. So this is how I'm going to be using them in that way, virtually. So
thank you. We have an example that we wanted to share from our school. This is our school. We're a dual language immersion with Spanish. What's interesting about our school is about a third of our teachers are from Spain. They come on a 3-year tour. And so we have a deep connection of culture, and actually 2 cultures occurring in our school. So we have the American culture that the students are coming from, and then they are presented with their teachers. Now that's awesome. What that does is it creates an immersion track, and it creates an exposure track. So the majority of our students, about 60%, are in immersion. So they're doing Spanish all day long, but it's also challenging, especially for the students with exposure. They generally are coming in as a transfer, or they just haven't been able to develop the strengths in Spanish at the same rate. And so there's a little bit of a separation that occurs there. And that's across our 2 campuses, K through 9, that happens. But our 6th grade, and Tanya's going to talk about how our 6th grade has taken this challenge on, our demographic, our cultural challenge, and the challenge of using restorative practices, and combine that, and she has kind of a good news story.
Yeah, so our 6th grade team has implemented using a morning meeting for 2 years, and this would have been the 3rd year, and had it not been for COVID, they would have done this. But they did it as an entire 6th grade community, so 112 students, and which is quite large for a morning meeting group. But they would use our gym and sit in circles in the gym, in a circle in the gym, and use that as their morning check-in time. So we saw such great results from that. And we also had challenges, right? As you can imagine, putting 112 students in a circle is a pretty daunting task. And they did it Monday through Thursday. Every morning they would do this. If you're not on your best game, that circle can quickly become out of control. And they learned that. So then another challenge is that we have seen is trying to get buy-in from more members of our staff to also incorporate this. And so like Dr. Campbell said, when we have pretty high turnover with these teachers on this 3-year tour. So something they had implemented for I think they were their first year they had one team, and then because of transitions where people going back to Spain and new people coming in, they have essentially a new team. And so that creates, we got to train the new person, and then we want these two new team members to also participate in this circle concept they didn't have any prior knowledge of how to do this or what it was, and maybe even scoffed at it a little bit, but as they get to see firsthand how they build relationships with their students there and get to see who they are and really get to know them, what happens is in our sixth grade team, our behavior referrals dramatically dropped because we found teachers were able to address the behavior with the students a lot quicker than they previously had, because they're addressing the student they know holistically, that they've gotten to know every morning for 30 minutes, little things about them. And so that behavior suddenly isn't such a problem because the student behind it is more important to them. And so that's one of the things. So improved relationships has been a big plus with that. So, and then we are seeking to make, like I told you, improvements in this where we can make this connection happen during these COVID times. And how do we do that, whether they're here in person or virtually? That's something we are really focusing on. And like I said, the Zoom and the emojis are, that's our talking piece.
Thank you. On that sixth grade model, that certainly was an experiment. I remember being incredulous and doubtful that it could be as impactful. But like Tanya had just shared, the investment we made each day for 10 to 15 minutes saved so much time and effort. And really what it was taking the time and helping those students go from a home life experience, the transition of getting in the car, running to school, and transitioning to the school environment, which was done at the beginning of the day. So if you can't do a whole grade, or if that isn't reasonable, and we're all in charters, it could certainly be done at the classroom level. And also then the next step would be doing it at the classroom or small group level virtually. And just taking a few minutes to help those students transition from wherever they were mentally and emotionally to what we're going to do can make a big difference. And also helps the teacher. What I found is when they did the big group, the teachers took time, like you said, it took a lot of effort on their part to come up with something, a topic, but they invested and they got the return. And so they felt more connected to their students. Honestly, at the second year, it became such a popular thing that a lot of us that were not in the sixth grade group would either go in just to participate or to watch, because they started to do things as a group. And one of them was the funny dance that happened a few times. And I think this is why it was so empowering, because nobody wants to be the individual that's made fun of, but when we're all in a group making a fool of ourselves and the vice principal is there dancing the baby shark dance, then all of a sudden, later in the day, the kids are pointing at you and say, hey, that was really funny when you did that, or the video comes out and parents want to know what was happening. But it was something that we had planned and prepared, but this synergy, the connections and the relations, even at that large group, happen. So it's a positive thing in that sense. Can be done in a smaller sense, absolutely. Tanya's going to talk about smaller circles and how to implement and.
Yeah, so with that, this is, if, like I said, in an in-person training, we would now do a circle. I'm not sure how many of you have participated in a circle. I just want to share my own experience. The first one, I went to a conference. I think I needed the CEs. I just went and I was like, oh, this sounds cool. And I really thought I was going to get to sit in a nice comfy chair in a nice auditorium and listen to a speaker, and it just complete passive experience. However, what I didn't know is when we walked in the room, it was set up with all these different circles, and it was really apparent this was an active learning conference here. And so I instantly kind of freaked out a little bit, but I was like, I can do this. It's no big deal. And didn't know anyone with whom I was sitting with. And the first circle I experienced had about 6 people in it. And I know we've all had experiences sitting in a circle around people we know, but this was an experience sitting around with 6 people I've never seen in my life. And we were being asked, the facilitator of our circle starts by laying the ground rules and tells about, this is what we're going to do in this circle. We're going to show respect for each other. Everybody is equal in this circle. We are going to care, like, for while we're together, we want to express empathy. We want to show empathy, and we're going to take responsibility for our actions. And the self-regulation for me was my own nerves about sharing. I'm actually a super private person, so I don't like to disclose my own feelings. I'm fine talking about other people's feelings, but I don't really want to take mine. But then she also talked about our own responsibility for making that circle experience for those that were in it a good experience. So that was the shared leadership. And so I just remember that as being the first, and it was such an impactful experience that I was able to have with these strangers. It was a 5-minute circle. So it was an introduction. It was share something about yourself, why you're here today. I think there were only 4 questions. It was quick. And what it shows is that you can quickly establish relationships with people you've never met and come to see them in just a way that you really get to see who the person is, not the person dressed really nice or not the person that looks disheveled. You really get to see who they are quickly by building a foundation and a relationship. And so that's kind of what I would like to kind of prompt you guys into thinking is maybe if you wouldn't mind even putting in the chat how you think you could implement restorative practices if you haven't, or circles in your school. Yeah.
So our next few resources, there are books, websites, and organizations that are out there. I know that Tanya has used the Circle Forward, that blue manual. She could talk a little bit about that. And then our next slide is really the resources, and then we'll go into a commentary, question, and answer. So if you could just tell which one is your favorite or what you've used.
So the blue Circle Forward book, it is a Bible for running circles. It has about every scenario you can think of. So it has prompts for you to set up the circle. It has guiding questions to facilitate the discussion in the circle. And so it is I don't want to say a no-fail manual, but essentially it's a no-fail manual. It's wonderful. It has so many resources for you. It's probably 500 pages. It's about $80 on Amazon, and it's money well worth spent. You could use this in a family situation. It is for school, but you can get the guidelines and see what it is. And so they have community building, classroom management, IEPs, how to run a circle for an IEP, which is an awesome way to bring the student into the IEP, which I just wanted to can you share your experience with the IEP and how a circle could have?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're like I said, we're continuing to try to improve our processes. And one of them that I sat in an IEP after being familiar and exposed to circles and also restorative practices, you start to think in that mindset. You start to look for opportunities to respect and engage and really have the student be part of the participation. And unfortunately, this is a negative experience, but from it we learned. What I watched is the student was there, and as all of us adults, the parent is talking and asking the questions, and the SPED director and a teacher and the other teachers were sharing so many experiences. They really were just talking over the student's head. And I got distracted by watching the student and realizing this little child doesn't know what we're really talking about. One, they're a SPED student, so they're struggling. So they know that. And they know that mom and dad are here. And they know that they're all the people that are important to them as far as teachers and their SPED teacher assistant are there, and even the vice principal. But they really didn't know why or what the outcome is. And just, again, it goes back to looking at their face. And in that instance, really what I did is, I finally got a moment, because there was just a lot of discussion that was required and what we were planning and the past plan and what the future was. I just stopped everybody and asked the student if they understood what we're doing, if they knew who the people were in the room, and kind of slowed things down for them, and not just them, but for everyone, and reminded us that, you know what, you're doing some great things. And all of a sudden, the students' demeanor changed, because they really didn't know if they were there for being in trouble, or that they were dumb, or that their mom had called the meeting. But once they realized we are here, and all these people came, and this was an elementary student, of course, and sharing with them, all these people here because we care about you, and we want to help you. And what are some things that you need to worry about? The funniest thing is they wanted to go home and eat snacks. Honestly, the one truthful comment in the whole meeting, right? The kid didn't have any barriers to say, I'm hungry, it's 4:00 in the afternoon, I want to go home. But once we got that out, we had a giggle, we were able to say, okay, well, let's finish this up, and then you can go home with your mom and dad, and we are glad that you came. Set the conditions for the next IEP that went so much better. All of them were well done, but the students' experience was certainly well done. Like Tanya said, we have the Circle Foundation book that we reference on a regular basis. There's also IIRP. That's a website, and it's a resource organization that we recommend holistically. Just go there. You can find everything you need and how to apply it. In closing, we just have to use. We'll step out of this presentation. We'll move to the camera, and then we'll get on the chat. I understand that you can't necessarily communicate with us other than the chat, but what I can do is read what the question is, and then we'll go from there for the rest of the time remaining. So, and stop sharing that so we can go to the chat portion. So if any of you have any comments or questions, Saba, I see that you had a great question. It says, are circles still being conducted in the virtual world? It looks like there was a second comment.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, okay. So if you want to talk a little bit about your idea, and have we done that in our school, or is that something you're planning on doing?
It's something that I'm planning on doing. As I said, we have done the virtual, we're doing a hybrid model for our in-person student, and we have a complete separate online school. And so those students, that's where we're gonna try that. It's a little smaller base. And so we're gonna try running a circle next week. I know it's a short week, but we're gonna do a really simple topic about what they're gonna do on their days off, and see how that goes. So
on circles, we haven't run circles yet, but we're also doing, just like everyone else, is evaluating how the fall is going. We just finished up term 1, and we fell on our face. COVID mitigation, we can't be beat. We are doing excellent because of our hybrid and the masks and everything. Academics in connection with our student is really tough. So we're implementing some changes. It's not necessarily a circle, but this is something that we're doing time now. We just started it yesterday, but it took and there was some friction amongst teachers, hard to believe, of getting office hours on Zoom that parents and students can go to at any time throughout the week, and they know that's going to be there. Some of the other things is we've now repurposed some of our teacher assistants to be outreach on virtual days every time to the same student so that they have that connection. Again, it goes back to relationships, whether it's the one-on-one or it's the one on 25 or the one to 120 or 250 like a counselor. If you do the relationship piece, then that connection is made. And the circle is simply a form of conducting that. And when we're virtual, it's very difficult, but can be done in the virtual sense, like Tanya was saying, when we're going to start doing those, just because we realized we weren't doing that well. And we're also, as administrators and teachers, we're also coping with COVID ourselves. And so sometimes we have to step back and realize what we used to be doing that was a very good practice somehow we're missing or skipping. We haven't done a professional development last month because I simply forgot. And so this month we corrected that, just in the throes of dealing with the different circumstances. Great question. Are there any other questions that you would like to put in the chat? Looks like we have about 5 more minutes. We'll give you a minute or two to type those up.
And one of the things as we embarked on this school year, as an administrative team, we just kept focusing and messaging out to everyone, like, we need to be innovative and think of new ways to do things. I think what we failed to recognize is it's new ways to do every single thing. And we fall into sometimes the biggest problems and obstacles we're facing is we keep trying to do the same old things and just try to do them with the mitigation factors. And so I think what, as thinking about how we can incorporate community, a stronger connection with one another, how really implement the one caring adult, make sure our students know who that person is, and it's not an email address. We want them to know it's a person. And so that is really going to be our focus. We only have school 2 days next week. So one group comes one day and another group comes the second day. And that is our biggest thing is we want, our next focus for the rest of the year is who is that caring adult and how are we connecting with them? And that's really going to be our circle, if you will.
Sounds good. Well, we're right at the last little bit. Don't want to cut out early. We really appreciate everyone participating and the questions that you've posed. Also, just the experience of sharing online, we better understand how teachers struggle with that. I appreciate the patience that you showed as I try to switch back and forth. But we'll just sit here for a moment. If there's not any particular questions come up in the chat, then we'll close out. We're going to turn off the camera and just kind of be available, watching on the chat, and then we'll be done since we've got about 3 minutes.
Have a great weekend.